Indeed. Thank you. Maybe I aspire to be an engineer. I don't know. Because in my experience, lots of engineers are into vintage electronics. Well, thank you, Chris, for that gracious welcome. Our opening session today is going to cover a wide range of legal and regulatory issues that radio and TV stations need to be aware of. But first, let me introduce our distinguished panelists. First is Sam Matheny to my left. Sam is Executive VP and Chief Technology Officer for the NAB. In this capacity, Sam leads NAB's technology team in its efforts to promote innovation and propel broadcast technology into the future. He's got more than 25 years of experience in the broadcast and data networking industries, including even earning a patent for inventing mobile and interactive TV technologies. And I learned last night that Sam avoids all the traffic in Washington, D.C. by flying. So he literally just takes off in the skies. I'm sure some of you are that way too. Next is Dave Oxenford, a partner with Wilkinson, Knauer, LLP, who serves as regulatory counsel to several of our associations, Indiana and Michigan and Kentucky. He has represented broadcasters for 40 years with experience in all areas of broadcast law, including the FCC's multiple ownership limitations, the political broadcasting rules, EEO policy, advertising, other programming matters, and technical rules of the FCC. And in addition to representing a large number of station groups, David represents a number of state broadcaster associations, the Trade Association for Media Brokers, program and service providers to the broadcast and digital media industry, as well as banks and others. And I must say, David, as my counsel, you are amazingly fast at responding. So as a client, I appreciate that. And our third panelist this morning is Patrick Cross. Patrick is an attorney with Brooks Pierce, which serves as regulatory counsel for the OAB. Patrick represents media and broadcasting companies and radio and TV stations on a wide range of issues, similar to David, in the FCC regulatory area, enforcement matters, programming, licensing, copyright, and other intellectual property matters. He's been practicing law since 2016, clerked for 2 federal judges prior to joining Brooks Pierce. So during our prep call that we had for this session last week, I should probably start by saying it's kind of amazing that we have 80 people gathered early in the morning, it's like church almost, to talk about regulatory issues. So I know that this is a popular session and we're going to get into it right now. Thank you for coming and learning this morning. So during our call last week, our panelists did identify a number of issues to discuss with you. But before we jump right into those, we've asked Sam Matheny to give us a brief update on some of the work that the technology department of the NAB has been undertaking. So please welcome Sam Matheny.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Chris, and all of the organizers. Thank you all for getting up early and being here. It's really a treat to be back together in person. I know, for a while there we were really all doing Zoom and Teams and all these other things, but there's nothing better than being here in person and the collaboration. So I'm very excited for that. I wanted to start, I've got some slides and I want to talk a little bit about TV, a little bit about radio, and of course, if you're going to talk tech today, you got to talk about AI. So we're going to talk a little bit about AI. But before that, if you tune out the rest of my talk, I do want to give you 2 homework assignments. Number 1, there is a national EAS test that is coming up in October, and if you are not aware of that, I'm making you aware of that. Go and look into it. I'm sure we'll get into that later, but it's vital that we have strong performance as it relates to the EAS system, and we hope that that is on your to-do list. If not already, then as of now. And then also, if you use the 13 gigahertz band for ENG or otherwise to connect your operations, you need to check that filing and make sure that you protect your ability to do that. So National EAS test and 13 gigahertz, those are 2 things that I hope you're paying attention to first and foremost. And now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're working on. And again, starting with television, we are looking at a lot of change in viewer consumption patterns. So the good news is broadcast over-the-air television is in a growth mode. You can see since 2014, we've more than doubled the number of folks that are using over-the-air and broadcasting. MVPDs, traditional cable and satellite, in heavy decline. You can see that number there is cut almost in half, the number of users that are doing that. Virtual MVPDs are growing, streaming. People that are using things like YouTube TV or Hulu Plus Live as their mechanism of getting TV. And then, of course, over the top or other forms of streaming. So what this leads us to is a place of what I call BYOB. And we're not talking about beer here. What we're talking about is your bundle. And what people are doing is they're building their own bundle. They are using streaming and on demand as a way of getting a lot of their entertainment, but they are using broadcast over the air, whether that's with an antenna or via an MVPD or a VMPD, for their live local news, as well as sports. And what we're really seeing in sports is interesting because the regional sports networks are in heavy decline, if not going away. And a lot of that sports content is moving to broadcast. So you see groups like Scripps, like Gray, like Nexstar, and others that are doing direct deals with teams like the Las Vegas Knights, the Phoenix Suns. The CW Network just did a deal with the Atlantic Coast Conference for 50 football games to be broadcast over the air. So there is a resurgence, if you will, in sports. I'm going to say returning to broadcast, but of course the NFL and the Olympics and other major sports leagues have long been anchored in broadcast. So people are building their own bundles. And what does that mean? You know, when you look at a proxy, if you will, antenna sales, right? If you don't believe like the numbers and this is antenna sales. This was in Forbes and some data from last year. But 8.5 million antennas were sold in 2021. Of course, some of that is pandemic spending, and the number now is roughly around 7 to 7.5 million. But if you go into a Best Buy, if you go into consumer electronics stores today, you will see entire shelves devoted towards antenna sales. And so that obviously bodes well for over-the-air broadcasting, and we're looking at certainly the deployment of next-gen TV. NAB is heavily involved in the standards process, as well as working with our members in the CTA for the deployment of next-gen TV. Today we're live in 70 markets. We've got nearly 380 channels that are on the air, and we're reaching over 65% of U.S. television households with at least one transmitter of ATSC3 or next-gen TV. And a major development is happening next month, and that is that New York launches in October. They're slated for October 16th. I can say that with confidence because the crawls are already running on the stations. And New York is actually going to be a 2-transmitter market. They've got one on World Trade, as well as one in December that's going to come online off of Empire. So you're really going to see a lot of broadcasting in the largest of markets. And so that's really going to push us over the 70% mark. Why is that important? Because you're starting to get a supermajority of the country that's broadcasting in next gen. And if you are a large consumer electronics company, that's the point at which you're willing to do a national ad campaign promoting that lineup. So as we look at what's happening in on that side of things, these are the latest statistics from CTA. You can see a dramatic growth in the sales of next-gen TV sets, as well as next-gen TV receivers, so little boxes that might plug in to your existing TV set. And so those are really happening at a good clip now, but you can see very strong projections for the years ahead. And this all plays into ultimately what will be a transition from ATSC1 to ATSC3 in its entirety. So the FCC announced the Future of TV initiative earlier this year at NAB Show. Monthly meetings started convening. NAB is hosting those, and these monthly meetings are diverse stakeholders are happening monthly. Those started in June. They actually started on June 12th, which happens to be the anniversary of the analog TV shutoff back in 2009. So a little bit of history there. There are 3 active working groups. One is focused on backwards compatibility. Next Gen TV or ATSC3 is non-backwards compatible, so there are a variety of issues that need to be solved there. Another group is focused on completing the transition. Of course, those 2 working groups have some overlap in terms of the issues that they're dealing with. But the third working group is one that I think is particularly important because it sends a strong signal, and that is there is a group that is focused on what is the post-transition regulatory environment. And so the key there is post-transition. So it's the FCC clearly, in my view, signaling that, what started off as a voluntary, broadcasters and consumer electronics, if y'all want to do this, go do it, to now they're more engaged and focused on a full transition. So I'm going to switch now over to radio. And specifically, electric vehicles is something I want to flag here. So what you see here is the auto show from 1909. 1909 auto show, right? You see that yellow square? That is a square highlighting all of the electric vehicles. So in 1909, you had a very good chunk of electric vehicles in comparison to what are called ICE vehicles today. You know what ICE stands for? Internal combustion engine, so gas. But EVs are resurging. But radio, was starting to be built into cars very early on. Then it became the best part of your ride. And now you've got new user interfaces where you're moving from buttons and knobs to screens and swipes. And then, if you buy a Buick today, they're running ads that say, hey, it's not a Buick, it's an Alexa. So they're really playing up the fact that, you have voice control. So a lot is changing there. And then if you just look in the car, this is an Xperi product with Mercedes. They had 5 screens. 5 screens in this one vehicle. And at the IBC show over in Amsterdam, they work with BMW to highlight their video solution. So there's a lot happening in the automotive space. And if you are a radio broadcaster, we at the NAB really feel like you ought to be paying attention to your metadata, the information about what you are broadcasting. If you are not paying attention to your metadata, I will promise you that somebody else is. And that somebody else may not have your best interest in mind. They may have their best interest in mind. So pay attention to your metadata, not only because it impacts your station brand, but because you can also earn new revenue by doing so. In that vein, the NAB has developed a metadata digital best practices guide. This is available. I'm going to have a QR code in a moment that's going to link to some of these resources. This was created in 2019, updated in 2021. It's getting the final spit and polish put on it now. It's going to be republished again here on the website soon. So we encourage you to pay attention to this and download it and use it as a reference as you look at your station operations. But now we're really looking at the connected car. So going beyond just metadata that can be provided in band and looking at what can happen when you have an internet connected vehicle that also has radio in it. So we've developed a set of principles. I'm not going to read all of these, but I will tell you that these are posted. This document is posted now on the link that I'm about to give you on our automotive best practices. But basically what we say is, in this connected world where there are other metadata providers that are vying for access to that screen, which is now how your station is presented in the vehicle, that radio should stay front and center. It should be free. It should be easy to access. And when a radio station is providing metadata and other programming, that should stay front and center and be used as the primary source. It should not be usurped by some third-party data coming in from another provider. And over-the-air listening should be the primary way that radio is presented. If you're going to use internet streaming, do it for somebody when they're out of the market. And core, the last point is, there's a lot of analytics that are being generated. This is a new opportunity that broadcasters have, and those analytics, that listening for the radio, should be made available back to the station. So those, in a nutshell, are our principles. This is the QR code that I promised. We have an automotive initiative homepage. It's at nab.org. You can find it there, or you can scan this QR code and visit there, and you can get access to all of these different resources. So, and then, of course, I know we're talking about technology, but one of the key technologies, and this goes back to the EAS test that I mentioned earlier, is the AM for Every Vehicle Act. This is a bill that has significant support and is aimed at making sure that AM radio remains in every vehicle. Our government relations department is working heavily on this, and you can see that we've got a third of all senators and members of the House of Representatives co-sponsoring this. So we're very excited about the progress that we've made with this, and we're going to continue to push it. I'm short on time, but what I want to do is move from AM to AI. And talking about AI, this is a logo that I generated last night at logoai.com. I'm not sure it actually used AI, but the fact that I could go to Google and say AI logo and it gave me a website that purports to generate one tells me that AI is the new 5G. And what I mean by that is nobody knows what the hell it means. It's become a marketing term. It's going to solve all the world's issues, and I'm not convinced most people know how to spell AI, right? So, all of that being said, and all of the little jabs there, I'll share this poem that our senior vice president went to ChatGPT and said, write a poem about Sam Matheny. This is what it spit out, or part of it. So I kind of thought that was funny, and this is generative AI. So generative AI is a different form of artificial intelligence, and it has certain applications that you should both be paying attention to, because you might want to embrace it and use it in some ways, but you should also be scared of or concerned about and be thinking about, what does this mean for my business? And so this is what I call artificial intelligence or real stupidity. You really need to be paying attention to AI. These are some of the use cases. Some of them are positive. You can use them to help in your sales prospecting or news or lead generation or writing a better outreach letter. You can use them to analyze your news archives, if you have news archives, and discover and access content faster that you might integrate into a story today. You can build your own chatbots or personalities and use it for social media analysis. But you need to beware. If you have a journalistic bent in your organization and you're publishing news, you don't want anyone to be able to say, oh, that news story by your station was actually written by AI, right? It calls into question the integrity of what you're publishing. And it's something to be aware of. A lot of our members are putting rules in place around AI. A lot of members are also worried about disintermediation. If I go to Google now and I search, it provides a link that goes back to my website. If I go to OpenAI and I ask it a question, it gives me an answer. and it generates that answer from scraping my website, right? And that's why a large majority of our members are blocking the ChatGPT bot that scrapes websites, right? So those are just some things to think about. On the business opportunity side, another one is, why is ChatGPT trying to scrape your website? It needs it for training data. Training data is the heart of AI, and that might be a license opportunity. The Associated Press has done a licensing deal, and there's the possibility that broadcasters could do those direct. We're going to be talking about a lot of this stuff at NAB Show New York. If you're able to attend that, I'm moderating 2 panels on AI alone, and that's coming up October 24th through 26th. And with that, I will say thank you, and I'm only a couple of minutes over time. So thank you so much.
I'm going to go back to Sam's wonderful poem. I really like that, Sam. With his expertise and vision, he helped shape the industry's decision, ensuring that the public's best interest is met and that broadcasters are not left in debt. That's awesome. That is awesome. All right, if you can put up the other presentation, we are going to go through some topics with our panel here, our regulatory update, and these are the topics, and we only have 45 minutes. So I have prepared a way for us to keep moving. So we get 9 minutes per topic. You ready? All right, here we go. So the first one is FCC leadership, and we have some news there, and I'm going to turn it over to Patrick to cover the first point. We finally have 5 commissioners.
Yes. Finally 5 commissioners. It's been, I think, 33 months that we have been at a 2-2 deadlock at the commission, so that's a lot of meetings like this where we've had to say, gosh, it's kind of split. We don't know what's going to happen. But earlier this month, Ana Gomez was confirmed by the Senate to take the 5th seat on the commission, and she officially was sworn in on Monday. And so that's where we currently stand. As you recall, Gigi Sohn was the prior nominee. There were lots of concerns with her about, for various reasons, involvement with LOCAST, board of directors, raising all sorts of concerns from the television and broadcast industry in general. Ana Gomez didn't raise those same type of concerns. She has a depth of experience in the public and private sectors, has worked at the FCC in multiple capacities for many years, deputy chief of the International Bureau, also high-ranking positions at the NTIA. And so what that means and sort of where we go now is that the deadlock is finally broken. There are multiple sort of pending issues at the FCC that we're likely to see movement on, from EEO record-keeping obligations, Form 395B. There's a notice of proposed rulemaking that's been out there. That form has been on the books for decades now, but has been suspended while there were issues with confidentiality, so we'll probably see movement on that. Multiple ownership rules. We have the last quadrennial review, which should have been resolved in 2022, to examine the local media ownership rules, television, radio, both general caps and FM and AM subcaps. And then we have the new quadrennial review that was started, even though the other one hasn't been finished yet. So we'll probably see movement on that, as well as foreign sponsorship ID. So that's where we're headed. The next bullet point here, but for how long, underscores the fact, however, that as it currently stands, Commissioner Starks in particular is currently serving in his holdover term. There's a provision of the Communications Act that lets him continue to stay on even after his term is officially expired. However, that comes to an end December 31st. So unless there is Senate action to confirm, reconfirm Starks to his seat, we'll be back to 4-4. Starks is moving at the same time as Carr through the nomination process. Carr has been renominated, but he can technically stay on through the end of 2024. But Starks has a history at being at the commission. He was former chief of the Enforcement Bureau, so it seems likely that he will be reconfirmed, that we'll stay at 5 full commissioners, but it could technically be split 2-2 before long. The final point that I'll hit here is the Space Bureau before tossing it over to David. And that is that the International Bureau, as we've traditionally conceptualized it, is no more. That has been transformed over into the Space Bureau and the Office of International Affairs.
Does it have a logo?
So interestingly, they're still in the process of implementing a lot of this stuff. The International Bureau Filing System, to your point, Dave, has been changed over to the International Communications Filing System, which is now the link that's on the FCC homepage, but it still goes to IBFS, my IBFS. So we're still in a period of transition. The important thing for you all to understand, I think, about that transition is that as part of that, sort of the senior staff that we're used to working with in the IB on your KU receives, your S&G receives, they're starting to transition. And so we're getting some interesting questions on license applications that we haven't before. So you may need to be aware of that as you go through your dish licensing. As well as the fact, as I'm sure all of you are aware, the conversion from CDBS to LMS has had some hiccups along the way. ULS is a potential pain point always. And with the transition over to a new filing system for the International Bureau, now Space Bureau, there could be some similar hiccups there. And there are already hiccups in the system, as I'm sure you all are aware. So it's something to keep an eye on as that transition continues to occur, because we're entering into sort of a new regime for Earth Station licensing in particular.
Hiccups in the FCC system. Wow, what a concept, huh? Probably have noticed those once or twice. Oh, I can't get this thing filed today, or tomorrow, or the next day because the system isn't working. You know, the fact that there has been a 2-2 tie on the FCC, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, is not a bad thing, because they can't do a lot of big nasty stuff, although they can do little nasty stuff that we'll talk about later. But this entire session may be irrelevant come Sunday when the FCC shuts down along with the rest of the federal government. You've probably been following the news. You can't turn on a TV station, listen to the radio news, or read a newspaper without seeing that the federal government runs out of money on Saturday night at midnight. Come Sunday, potentially national parks will be shutting down. Social Security checks won't be going out, veterans benefits will be delayed, and the FCC will potentially be shut down, meaning we're not quite sure what it means. Because in the past, we've seen the FCC actually stay open for a week to 10 days based on some money that they found in a slush fund from the prior year that they hadn't spent yet. And that may be kicking around. And they may spend it to keep things operating for a couple of days in hopes that the shutdown is a short one. A lot of people in Washington are not expecting this to be a short shutdown. So they may keep that money, not spend it to keep the whole FCC operating, but to keep certain parts of it operating for a longer period of time. In the past, some shutdowns they've kept operating, other shutdowns they've shut down, and really shut down, and turned off all their online databases, all the public inspection files, all the FCC, really shut down the FCC website entirely. So we will be watching, probably this session should have been this afternoon, because there may well be a public notice out of the FCC this afternoon, or certainly tomorrow, saying what happens on Monday if the government doesn't have any money. Will the filing systems be open to the extent that they're always open to and not broken down? Will there be people there to answer phone calls? Will applications get processed? If you're waiting for a modification application or a transfer application or anything else and it's otherwise ripe, start calling right now to the people at the FCC to get it granted by tomorrow. Because otherwise, who knows? You could be sitting around waiting for months until the FCC reopens if the shutdown is a really long one. So something to watch out for. We'll come back to some other issues that it raises as we go along.
From a leadership standpoint, which is the first bullet, so now we've got, for now, a fully staffed FCC from a commissioner standpoint. And already there's talk about reviving net neutrality. Patrick, do you think that's just the first shoe to drop, and then that a number of these things are coming?
I think it could be sort of a harbinger of things to come. I think there is a potential focus on general digital sort of privacy concerns, and sort of the way that we consume media. I mean, this is wrapped up in sort of all the ownership proceedings and everything affecting broadcasters right now, is how we marry OTA with digital production. And so I think that the FCC is very focused on that. We'll touch on that some in the EAS space as well. So I think it could be sort of the tip of the spear and sort of what we see coming out of the FCC on those types of issues.
Yeah, we hear that there are a lot of rulemakings that the chairwoman has had staff write on a whole bunch of issues, including a number of broadcast issues that are just waiting for Ana Gomez to be fill that seat, which just happened yesterday, right? She was finally sworn in. So watch for all sorts of issues to be coming up that can affect you all.
Sam, from an NAB standpoint, I presume the team in government relations is well connected, Rick Kaplan and team, so they're ready to defend the territory, so to speak?
Yeah, definitely, and I think kind of going back to where we started, I think the key victory here is that it's Ana Gomez and not Gigi Song, because of her background, which Patrick already covered. So, but yeah, we're heavily engaged. Rick Kaplan and his team in our legal department are at the FCC. I think some of the stuff that we find a little bit interesting is that the chairwoman's positions on whether the FCC has authority or doesn't have authority, seems to change frequently, and so that's it makes us wonder, like, exactly, where things might go, because sometimes she's at odds with herself.
All right. Now we go to the next subject, which is enforcement. If we advance, can you advance to the next slide for me? Maybe, maybe not. There we go. All right. I won't penalize you for that. Mr. Oxenford, got a bunch of enforcement issues. Let's assume the commission is open and operating, which might be a leap. What do you think?
Yeah, these are the areas that even with a 2-2 FCC, the FCC has continued to watch out or continue to penalize broadcasters that have problems. Translators, FM translators, everybody's favorite for AM. You got these FM translators, but the FCC's been finding them at the wrong places, at the wrong heights, non-directional when they're supposed to be directional, with more power than they've been authorized. If you've got a translator, pay attention to the license and make sure you're operating with a license. Just on your regular main station, make sure that you're operating the way you're supposed to be operating. So many stations have problems at some point or another. Their monitoring points aren't in on their AM stations. Their FM has got a problem and they're operating at a lower power than they're supposed to be operating. And they know that the repair is coming along, that piece is in the mail. They'll have it installed, so they don't want to do anything about it. 10 days if you're operating at lower power, supposed to notify the FCC. 30 days, you're supposed to ask permission to continue to do that. And if they find out that you're continuing to operate after 30 days, and that competitor across the street, somebody getting interference, somebody just randomly checking on something and finding out that you're not operating at the power that you're operating at, or if you have to file a mod application later as you change your facilities to get back into compliance, and you say, oh, by the way, we haven't been operating the way we're supposed to for 6 or 8 months, you're going to get a fine from the FCC. And the Enforcement Bureau has actually been going after these sorts of things. If you've got an FM translator for an AM station, the AM station goes off the air, or for that matter, a translator for an FM station, and the primary FM station goes off the air, the translator's supposed to go off the air. For an AM station, it's not supposed to be on more than if the AM has been off the air for more than 24 hours. For an FM, it's not specified, but the translator for an FM is supposed to just be rebroadcasting the FM. So if the FM's not on the air, what's the translator rebroadcasting? Unlike an AM that may not be operating at night, there is a period where the FM translator for an AM can keep operating when the AM is off the air. But for an FM translator, it should shut off if it's an FM rebroadcasting an FM. Watch all these issues. Make sure that you tell the FCC when there's something wrong, because they're out there looking for these things. And two other issues, or one other issue, the public file. I know it's not necessarily an engineering issue, but I know a lot of you guys get charged with keeping up the online public inspection file. It's another area that the FCC is regularly finding stations for, where stuff doesn't get into the public file on a routine basis, where they discover it as part of a license renewal or some other routine matter where they're looking at the public file. If the documents aren't there on a timely basis, fines are issued.
What about tower lighting? Is that a concern?
Yes. Yes. Make sure you're supposed to be monitoring those tower lights every day. Making sure that those lights are on, either by looking out the window and saying, hey, the lights are on or not, or some automatic monitoring system that's regularly checking those tower lights, and you're regularly checking that monitoring system to make sure that it's working. If the tower lights are out, notify the FAA immediately that the tower lights are out. We had a couple of years ago a client that a military plane ran into a tower where the lights were out. They had notified the FAA. The FAA had sent out the required notices, and they had done what they're supposed to do, and there was no liability. If that was to have happened without somebody having notified the FAA that the lights were out, man, you're looking at not just FCC fines, but potential civil liability that could be astronomical.
So wrapped up in the whole conversation about regulatory fees this year. So thanks to, I don't want to take credit where credit isn't deserved, but thanks to Chris in Ohio, thanks to Sam in Michigan, thanks to Chris in Kentucky, me in Indiana, and the other 46 states, we have been, and Puerto Rico, we have been pushing the FCC over and over and over and over about reg fees, because they keep proposing things for broadcasters to pay for things that have nothing to do with broadcasting. Finally, we seem to have cracked the nut here, and they backed down, and actually reg fees went down this year, which is, initially it was a COVID reason, but now it's, it's like the message is getting through. Related to that is pirate radio. So pirate radio is on the list as an enforcement issue, and the chairwoman says we are going to be more aggressive on that. David or Patrick, what do you hear on that subject?
And they have been. The FCC has been fining regularly not just pirate radio owners, but also the owners of the tower sites from which they operate, or the houses or buildings or where their antenna is, proposing fines of millions of dollars, over $2 million, which is the maximum fine now for pirate radio, to these owners of buildings from which the pirates are transmitting. I mean, if you get a letter from the FCC or from the government, hi, we're from the government, we're going to fine you $2.3 million if you don't shut off that pirate radio that's operating from your facility, you tend to pay attention to that sort of thing. So it has been going on. If you notice a pirate radio operating in any of your markets, somebody who's unauthorized operating on a broadcast frequency, let the FCC know. They've got a tiger team that goes out and actually checks out reports of pirate radio and regularly monitor the biggest markets in the country. They're required to do sweeps on a regular basis. So they'll be coming through some of the big cities throughout the country to make sure that there are no pirates operating. I noticed that there's another bullet point that I didn't mention there, auxiliary licenses. It's another area that there's been lots of problems, and ultimately it rolls over when we're dealing with some of the C-band clearances and other things, where you've got licenses for your STLs, your remote pickups, your satellite dishes, stuff that operates with your broadcast station, but you don't really pay that much attention to it. And you moved your studio and the studio transmitter link with it, and forgot to tell the FCC that it's no longer at this point, it's now at that point. So you're only protected from the point where you haven't operated for several years when you've moved over to the new place. Make sure you're keeping up those auxiliary licenses, because they protect you. They could protect you when some of these, on the TV side, when some of the spectrum is reclaimed for wireless uses. So make sure that you're watching all your licenses, not just the main station licenses.
This is the point in the program where if I were Paul Harvey, I would say page 3. I think this is a good point to talk about just briefly ABIP inspections, which even though the commission has taken down the ABIP inspection list, Blake, you do ABIP inspections here in Ohio, And Michigan has an inspector who I think is here, right? Okay, that's Blake again. Indiana's got an inspector, Kentucky's got an inspector. They took the checklist down, but I just wanted to express, since SBE is in the room, our appreciation as broadcasters. We know you are working on updated checklists, and we fully support that. We want our stations to be in compliance, and I know you do too. And we could argue the point about the commission and the public inspection file and all of that, but it starts with making sure stations are doing what they're supposed to do. So that's a good thing. All right, end of commercial. Patrick?
Oh, well, I'll just jump in on one quick thing on to David's great point about getting STAs for your facility when it's not in the authorized parameters. In particular, the audio division recently has been tying impermissible site locations to Section 312G of the Communications Act. And what that section says is that if you are not transmitting broadcast signals for 12 months, then your license automatically expires by operation of law. And so for a long time, this was conventionally thought if you were silent for a period of 12 consecutive months. The audio division's decisions have been trending in the fact of, well, if you're not at an authorized site, then you're not transmitting broadcast signals because it's not in conformance with your authorization. So you need to be really, really careful whenever there's any sort of major significant aspect that's to change to your station operations, because if you don't get an STA for it, you could potentially be looking at loss of the station license. And that's something we definitely want to avoid.
All right, next subject. Oops, back up one. Can you, I guess I could back, there we go. All right, so we're now going to go a little bit deeper on the pending FCC proceedings. David, tell us about the FM digital power proposals.
Yeah, Sam could probably tell us better about those proposals. The NAB and National Public Radio have proposed to allow FM stations to increase their digital power for HD radio, and also to authorize asynchronous sideband power. We can't necessarily operate with higher powers on both sides of your main signal because of interference concerns on one side, so you just operate with a higher power on the side where you can operate with it. And comments were filed last week, generally very supportive of the NAB NPR proposal to move forward and allow higher power. There was some comments that were filed that said, yeah, but we ought to allow for complaints to be accepted and to look at some of these high power increases, particularly where they're creating interference to existing stations within their protected service area. We should look at the number of complaints filed, something along the lines of the translator interference system that was adopted a couple of years ago for measuring interference to full power stations from translators. There was some debate over superpower stations, which doesn't affect you guys much, more of a California issue. A couple of other issues. Oh, the FAA came in and said they were concerned about increases in digital power creating interference to radios in airplanes. And they seem to be concerned about everything creating interference to radios in airplanes. So, you know, there'll be those sorts of issues. Reply comments are due next week, and then we should see a decision from the FCC, I would think, assuming they're open, sometime early in 2024.
Sam, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would just add that you mentioned earlier I was a pilot. So the VOR systems, the ILS instrument landing systems, a number of FAA systems that are critical to navigation operate starting at 108 megahertz. And so they are concerned about the sidebands, in particular of just 107.9 frequency. So they're not concerned about the whole band, but specifically about 107.9 and that channel. So we're having conversations with them, and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, and 107.9 has been a problem even with regular FM, not even the sidebands. We've had stations that are near to airports that haven't been able to upgrade power or change transmitter sites because of the possible interference.
Patrick, 13 gigahertz.
Yeah. So
What do we
this
need to
is
know?
One of the main proceedings going on at the FCC with the potential to affect your BAS operations in 12.7 to 13.25. host mobile E&G, fixed links throughout that band. And the FCC has been looking at that. You know, the wireless providers for many years now have been asking for more mid-band spectrum to deploy 5G. And so this is kind of a compromise proposal where the FCC said, well, you know, we can't get lower mid-band. Let's look to upper mid-band. So we're going to do 12.7 to 13.25. What does everybody think about that? Can we move broadcaster operations out of that band? As the current proposal stands, it is to effectively try and relocate or transition to new technologies, all the fixed links in the band, preserve your mobile E&G operations that are going in the band, but potentially move it to a smaller channel assignment, like a 25 megahertz swath, maybe more, maybe less. That all depends on how the comments shake out. But so the comment window is now closed on that. You had multiple folks within the industry, including NAB, really carrying the flag for broadcasters, saying, look, these are sort of crucial links, especially on the fixed side. You know, that's the way that we get the signal out to broadcast. And in congested markets, there's not necessarily another place that we can move it within the band or elsewhere. And so we really got to account for that. For mobile E&G operations, we got to make sure that you are able to continue to do short-term operations. There's a specific FCC rule that allows you to deploy temporary operations in mobile E&G because your geographic coverage on your license is not necessarily going to pair up with what you need to cover if there's a newsworthy event. And so we want to make sure that that's continued to preserve. And interestingly, the wireless providers filed comments, and a lot of them said, yeah, this is, you know, we'd like the access to the spectrum. But the majority of them kind of said, well, really what we'd like it for is 6G. We're looking to the future for the way that we would use this down the line, and so let's not necessarily adopt the rules that you proposed right now. Let's consider to kick this around and figure out what the technical rules should look like for that new future service deployment in 6G. So it injected a little bit more uncertainty than I think we were kind of expecting in that proceeding. It'll sort of depend on how the FCC wants to approach this, whether or not they want to take it out to another further notice of proposed rulemaking on the potential 6G capabilities, and whether or not they should go ahead and recalibrate the band towards that, or whether or not they just want to go ahead and move ahead with the proposals they have on the floor. So that's the aspect of the rulemaking. Well, as I said, the comment window closed very recently, so we'll probably, you know, be waiting for a little while to see the FCC decisions, particularly as they sift through all the comments that were filed. For broadcasters, and as Sam mentioned at the beginning, one of the two things please take away from this presentation, if nothing else, is that similar to what we went through with C-band, there is a certification deadline for all of your links in the 13 gig band. The FCC has, by November 29th, required all broadcasters to verify the accuracy of the licensing information for your links in the band that are available in ULS. So you have to look at the data that's in ULS, and then you have to file a certification also in ULS that says, yeah, this is all correct, and yes, we're operating as authorized. There's an opportunity to do modification applications if you find some discrepancies. There are particular sort of boxes you need to tick if you're going to have to go through that process. The important thing about this is, as I said, comparing it to the C-band, the FCC is likely to use this as a cutoff point. If you file the certification, then you may be eligible for interference protection in the newly reconstituted band. You may be covered for reimbursement expenses if you end up having to relocate. You may be eligible to be repacked into that 25 megahertz spectrum for mobile E&G operations. If you don't file it, though, and this is exactly what happened in C-band, as some broadcasters were caught unaware, didn't file, and then you're out of luck. You lose incumbent status, you don't get any relocation, and so it's really, really imperative, and thankfully they gave us a long runway here. C-band was much shorter. It was a much quicker turnaround, but we have until November 29th, so I know this is a busy, busy fall for everybody in this room with the NPT. We'll discuss that a little bit later, and multiple other filing deadlines. For those of you who are managing OPIF, you've got carriage elections coming up on Monday. So I know it's very busy, but this is really, really important because it has far-reaching effects potentially for your broadcast operations well into the future.
So if you're using the 13 gigahertz for E&G, make sure that by 2 months from now, November 29th, you're set and you filed.
I was just going to ask Sam for distinguishing 6G from 5G and a dissertation on that subject.
Oh, we don't have enough time for that. But what I would say is that the wireless industry was very effective at marketing 5G and all of the promises that I talked about earlier. And I would expect them to rally those same resources into 6G. But what I want to offer a little word of caution is, hey, we got a long runway, but like, go ahead and do it now, right? Don't get me wrong. I was working on my slides this morning, right? But like, don't put it off until the last minute. You know about it, plan for it, schedule for it. Go ahead and do it now.
One of my stations in Indiana told me that, the engineer told me that his website gets hit 7,000 times a day by bad actors trying to break in. So that's our next subject, is cybersecurity. There is an open proceeding at the commission. What's going to happen with that? What are they going to lay on us, do you think?
That's an interesting one. The broadcast industry, I think, was very successful in putting advocacy into that proceeding. As Dave just said, there is a NPRM currently pending, and frankly, in my view, a lot of it came out of the fact that we were at a 2-2 split for so long, and this was an easy consensus decision to get to issue an NPRM on EAS cybersecurity. And basically, it looked back at the history, which admittedly is very small, but there is a history of false EAS alerts, as I'm sure all aware. You had zombie, alerts that came out. You had the Hawaii false ballistic missile alert that happened. And so the FCC really kind of in this proceeding, in my view, painted in a very broad brush and proposed basically all broadcasters having to adopt sort of robust cybersecurity proposals for the way that they manage technology. And it's not just limited to EAS, it was sort of the technological aspects of the station overall. And it's not as simple as sort of just, putting something down on paper and making sure everybody reads it. It is really, really robust requirements about two-factor authentication, talking about disposing of old equipment once it's done, once it reached its end of life cycle, to try and take care of that. Pretty significant stuff that for large station groups probably wouldn't be that difficult. Y'all probably already have those sort of procedures in place. But for your small radio and television operators, especially in rural areas, it's a challenge sometimes to get the public file to work, even for the best of us, and trying to figure out how to navigate that. So NAB, I think in particular, filed some really effective comments and has continued to engage in ex parte activity in that docket, saying, look, the proposals are just too broad to cover the entire broadcast industry, number one, which I think is very true. I think another effective point that's been made is sort of, look, our problem isn't further down in the daisy chain, it's really the alert originators. Where we're seeing these sort of problems start. And whether or not we, look for, sort of EAS cybersecurity at the alert originator point, or if you're looking at sort of, if you want to take it to primary entry point stations, local primaries, that's fine. But sweeping it across the board to the entire broadcast station complement is just probably a bridge too far. The other point I wanted to flag on that, Dave, is that it gets tagged with the EAS cybersecurity name because that's the main focus of the proceeding. But in part of that, the FCC has also proposed sort of a fundamental change to the way operational readiness is required for EAS equipment. And so, as I'm sure most of you are aware, as it currently stands, if your EAS equipment goes down, you have 60 days to operate without any need for further authority with that equipment non-operational. You can have further time by putting an informal request into the field office of the local FCC field office there. What the NPRM proposes is that you have to report to the FCC within 24 hours if your EAS equipment goes down, which when EAS equipment goes down, y'all are probably scrambling to handle a lot of other stuff at the same time, and there's a potential sort of back-end look at fines if you miss that 24-hour notice in there. And so NAB, I think, again, filed some really effective comments on that point as well. But that's another component in there that is sort of waiting for decision. And where that will be resolved in light of all the good advocacy that's been done, I honestly don't know.
Hard to believe, next subject, that we're still talking about zone casting. David, I thought this thing was dead. Or is it like Monty Python? It's not
dead yet.
Yeah.
No, it's still wandering around. I mean, zone casting, the proposal to take FM boosters and allow origination of limited amounts of programming, like different car commercials in different parts of an FM station's service area, has been pending from a company called Geo Broadcast Solutions. a lot of concerns expressed by the NAB, by a number of big broadcast groups about interference, and just raising the noise floor on FM, on changing the way that broadcasting works, because it will allow big market stations to do zone casting into areas that are served by small market stations and do local origination commercials in those areas where right now the suburban stations have kind of the monopoly of being able to serve the local advertisers there because they can't afford to get on the big market stations. That's all been opposed. It's been sitting there waiting for FCC action for over 2 years. Seemingly nobody's rushing to get anything done there, but every couple of months you see the folks from Geo Broadcast Solutions make the rounds at the FCC, knocking on the doors of the commissioners, trying to get their proposals sprung. So it is still alive and could still have some life, just depending on how the new commissioners see it.
All right, and the last one up here on the screen, Class C4 FMs. What's
And
that about?
That's a proposal also that's been pending for a long time to allow a new class of FM station between the 6 kilowatt limited Class A's and the 25 kilowatt C3s, basically a 12 and a half kilowatt FM station. The advocates say, hey, it will allow better building penetration. Why not allow us to do that to better serve our communities? Others have expressed concerns about interference to translators, and again, just raising the noise floor with more and more operators on the FM band. That was just a notice of inquiry. That means that the FCC has to come out with a notice of proposed rulemaking as the next step. They can't go directly to a rule, unlike zone casting, where it's ready for final action. Here it would have to come out with a notice of proposed rulemaking and then a final rule. So C4s are 2 years down the road at best, if it ever happens.
I
Sam?
just wanted to add real quickly, as it relates to cybersecurity, we do have a cybersecurity working group, which is a group of both CISOs as well as others that are devoted to maintaining their cybersecurity operations. Kelly Williams is our liaison to that group. They meet regularly and discuss issues of cybersecurity, maybe less so from a regulatory environment, though they do cover that, and more so from an operational environment. So if you're interested in that. And then also David Lair is our liaison to the Radio Technology Committee. That group is looking at EAS virtualization as a possibility. So just a couple of tie-ins to the subject matter.
All right, we've talked about how the commission's going to come after you, so let's look at opportunities. If you can go to the next slide, Logan. We're getting close to the end. All right, David, November low power FM filing window.
Well, that's an opportunity for nonprofit groups, but it's a concern to keep on our, to give you one more thing to worry about here first thing in the morning, right? To get you off on the right foot of this conference. For most FM stations, what you got to be worried about is the possible interference that will come from low power FM stations. In particular, low power FM applicants are allowed to ask for second adjacent channel waivers, where they say they're not fully spaced to your FM station, but they make a showing that they're not going to be creating interference in any populated area, and they should be allowed to locate, especially in urbanized areas. You're going to see a lot of second adjacent channel interference because there just are not that many opportunities for low power FMs to fit in most major metro areas. So as a full power operator, you need to be watching for those second adjacent channel waiver requests, making sure that they're actually, when they're making a showing that they're not going to create interference in any populated area, that they're really not going to do it. And if they're proposing to do it with a particular antenna that keeps the radiation above the ground level or outside of populated areas, that they actually build the station with what they promised to do. Because sometimes we've seen them make promises and then not fulfill those promises once they've been implemented.
But this is also potentially an opportunity for engineers, maybe, in terms of new operators and contract engineers, perhaps.
No question, there will be nonprofit groups that are out there now. They should be looking now because the window opens at the beginning of November, 1st through 8th, to file these applications. They need to be out there locating transmitter sites, making sure that they can find locations where stations can fit without interference. So if you've got a nonprofit group, a school, a municipality, or any other nonprofit who's looking for a radio station, particularly outside the urbanized area, there are opportunities. Just watch out for the interference issues.
And Patrick, quickly on these last two bullet points, VHF to UHF channel change petitions and C-band, what's up with those?
Sure, yeah. So VHF to UHF is just an opportunity that's available for television broadcasters. There's been a lot of pent-up demand for potential channel changes. It's been frozen. The application filing, I think, was frozen since 2004 and finally opened up again in 2020. So that's a long period, and that's because you had the 2009 DTV transition and then repack. And so basically it was trying to preserve sort of the television landscape as all those things were going on. And so now that we've gotten past that point, there's meaningful FCC precedent in multiple locations now that says, yeah, digital and VHF don't really work out exactly the way that we thought it would. It's really hard to reach signal into certain aspects of the service population. And so there's been a steady stream of these filings. It's an opportunity that's available for you all, that any of you that are on a low or a high V channel that are experiencing issues from viewers, service complaints, to hire a contract engineer for you all to serve in that capacity and to examine whether or not there are any UHF channels available for the switch. The key for the engineering analysis is really to make sure that whatever the proposal looks at for the move, that you're not going to have anything more than a de minimis loss to service to the population. Video division staff, in my experience, has been very willing to sort of work with television broadcasters on this because they realize it's important to maximize service to be able to transition to UHF if you are experiencing service issues. So you can look at different ways to calculate the potential service loss by using terrain-limited methodology instead of typical Longley Rice. There are different ways to massage that. So just be aware that that opportunity is out there. C-band as well. This is less of an opportunity, a little bit of a risk, but it's something that everybody needs to be aware of. Originally, the C-band transition was scheduled to end at the beginning of December of this year. All of the satellite operators were able to successfully transition the Earth stations that they were responsible for earlier than that. So we have effectively reached the end of the transition now, which means that there are two important things that everybody needs to aware of. The first is that 5G overlay licensees are now deploying in 3.7 to 3.98. So that means that if you haven't, in particular for folks who took the lump sum operation, and so who were in charge of transitioning their Earth station dishes on their own, if you haven't installed filters yet to block interference down there, you may be having problems with your receive dishes now or very soon, because 5G overlay licensees are going to be deploying if they haven't already, and so you need to be aware of that, and you might need to have the filters installed now instead of if you were targeting in December. Similarly, for anybody who is still seeking reimbursement for any aspects of the transition, that window is still technically open. However, there's been recent filings in the FCC incumbency docket from satellite operators saying, look, the transition's over now. We need to bring an end to reimbursement at some point. We need to have a firm cutoff point established. And so again, a lot of folks were thinking, well, I have until December to get these requests in. I'm going to focus on it after I handle all this other stuff. That needs to be handled now if you haven't already done it. You need to go ahead and get on that, because although there's not a firm deadline set, I would not be at all surprised if the FCC acts sooner rather than later to establish a firm deadline by which reimbursement requests have to be submitted.
All right, last subject, we're going to go to EAS. October 4th is the National Emergency Alert Test. Patrick, what do we need to know for that?
In my 60 seconds here, I'll do the best I can. Main thing are everybody just be ready. 2:20 p.m. is the NPT for our broadcast folks. WIA is going to go out at 2:18, and I want to flag for you all that Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau and the FCC have been encouraging stations to the extent they want to, in your business judgment, to promote the fact that the WIA test is going to go to all handsets. You have the capability under the act that initially adopted WIA as a consumer to opt out of wireless emergency alerts, except for the presidential alert and therefore the NPT. So you're going to have a lot of folks who are going to get buzzes on their little handsets with the wireless emergency alert national test that are going to say, hey, I thought I opted out of that. So FCC is suggesting that if you're interested, to notify consumers of that fact. Aside from that, make sure you successfully receive and retransmit the tests. Prepare for it now. Check your monitoring assignments. Take care of everything on that end. It'll be delivered via iPause internet delivery this year, not daisy chain. So just be aware of the fact that that's going to be the entry point for you all. Your Form 2 report has to be filed within 24 hours after the test. So on October 5th, you need to file ETRS Form 2. That's just basic information about, did we receive the test? Did we retransmit it? And then the more comprehensive Form 3 report is due in the middle of November. So you have more time. That's more robust data about if you experience any audio issues, anything with the test in general. Those are the important points on the NPT. The other aspect is December 12th is the cap priority deadline. That is an FCC decision that came out last year that basically established a firm deadline by which EAS equipment needs to prioritize delivery by Common Alerting Protocol, CAP, by iPause. And so if it simultaneously or near simultaneously receives an alert from the internet and the daisy chain, the idea is to prioritize the internet delivery because it has more robust architecture. We're able to put more information in there, but that needs to be in place by December 12th, as well as new identifying text codes for the EAS, various categories of alerts. And so equipment manufacturers are rolling that out. The software and firmware updates are mostly available. There's some Sage is not yet available. And so just be aware of that. You need to be in contact with your equipment device manufacturers to make sure you hit that deadline.
Just one quick thing. Have either of you heard what will happen with the EAS test if the government shuts down?
That's a great question.
Have
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, because then you can't. It just came in? Oh, yeah, because we don't know, because if the filing system to report on the EAS test results is not operational, why have the test?
So I'll take that as an action item, but I also want to tie to look into that. But I also want to tie everything that was just said back into an opportunity. We have an opportunity for EAS to really perform well. And I just want to invite you, encourage you, challenge you, whatever, however you want, just please make sure you're ready. A, because it's important generally, but B, because it ties directly to our advocacy as it relates to the AM in Every Vehicle Act. And so, if EAS doesn't perform well, it's going to make it harder for us to promote some of the other advocacy that we're working on. So there is a relationship there that might not appear to be obvious, but I wanted to flag that for you.
All right, well, let's thank our panel for a terrific session today. So here's what you need to know. We are now going to take a break in the exhibit hall. I want to thank Telos for their sponsorship of the break, so you can visit with the exhibitors and get a fresh cup of coffee. Our first of the breakout sessions is going to start promptly at 10:40. And lastly, a reminder to drop your business card at the registration desk so you can be eligible for the door prize drawings, including the LG 4K television with Next Gen TV. And we'll be drawing the winners before our closing general session at 3:30 this afternoon. And of course, you must be present to win. Thanks for showing up this morning. Have a great day.
Pleasure as always, sir.